For more, we speak to our U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease on the story and the shifting political sands in the country, with President Joe Biden expected to address the nation later tonight for the first time since announcing his intention not to seek re-election. So, Sherwin, thank you so much for your time. I mean, we're not seeing the level of bipartisan support ahead of an Israeli Prime Minister's speech to Congress. And while we often hear of ironclad support for Israel from the leadership of the United States, that does not necessarily mean ironclad support for Netanyahu, right?
Absolutely right, Bongiwe. This is a very unpopular prime minister. Some 66% of Israelis do not want Netanyahu to seek re-election. They want him to go. And we saw that on the streets of the capital of Israel, Tel Aviv, over the weekend, where thousands, tens of thousands of Israeli protesters took to the streets to complain about his multi-day visit to the United States, where, of course, he will address a joint sitting of Congress. It's worth understanding how this played out. The Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker of the House, reacting to an op-ed by the Democratic leader of the Senate, a Jew himself, Chuck Schumer, writing an op-ed in the New York Times in March, basically calling on Israelis to dump Netanyahu, criticizing his right-wing government as an obstacle to the two-state solution and to peace. So you have one of the invitees on this letter with the Speaker basically calling for Netanyahu to step aside. So the Speaker then responded by floating the idea of inviting Netanyahu, and he will be confronted by many empty seats in the chamber today. A lot of Democratic lawmakers have indicated they will not be attending. And of course, outside of the Capitol precinct, tens of thousands of protesters have already gathered to protest this visit, calling for a ceasefire deal in Gaza and for Palestine to be free. We understand that some 200 New York Police Department officials have gone down to Washington, D.C. to support the Metro Police there in managing the protests that are expected outside of the precinct. And then a letter from the Speaker to members of Congress, Bongiwe, Mike Johnson, writing that due to the attention garnered by the Prime Minister's address, there will be an increased police presence around the Capitol complex and in the House chamber. In the interests of all involved, we will enforce a zero-tolerance policy for disturbances in the building. There is a great concern from the Republican Speaker that there might even be some protests inside of the chamber from certain lawmakers who are going to attend that address today. And we also heard yesterday from senior independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who took to the Senate floor to complain about this invitation to Netanyahu. This is a little bit of what Bernie Sanders had to say. Watch.
Just last week, the International Court of Justice issued a ruling on the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. A panel of 15 accomplished judges from around the world confirmed what most of the world has long known: that occupation is illegal and must end. I know that there are some here in Congress, not many, but some, who have condemned Netanyahu and his extremist government. But condemning Netanyahu is not enough. We cannot condemn a prime minister who the ICC considers to be a war criminal, while at the same time continuing to provide his government with tens of billions of dollars in military aid. That is hypocrisy at its worst. Netanyahu is a right-wing extremist and a war criminal who has devoted his career to killing the prospects of a two-state solution and lasting peace in the region. He should not be welcomed to the United States Congress. On the contrary, his policies in Gaza and the West Bank should be roundly condemned, and his right-wing extremist government should not receive another nickel from U.S. taxpayers.
Senator Sanders not mincing his words there, Bongi. We're also saying, to the best of my knowledge, it's the first time a war criminal will be given the honor of addressing Congress, and the invitation is a disgrace that we will look back on with regret. calling the ICC charges against Netanyahu well-founded. Also worth noting, it will be the fourth time that the Israeli Prime Minister will address a joint sitting of Congress, the only world leader to be afforded such an opportunity 4 times. The only other leader was Winston Churchill that addressed a joint sitting of Congress on 3 occasions, Bongiwe.
And Sherwin, of course, all of this is happening as we shift our focus now to U.S. electoral politics. And what a difference 3 days can make, especially since President Biden announced he would step aside, immediately endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris to replace him. Let's talk about the sentiment around this decision and what we might expect from President Biden when he addresses the nation tonight.
Yeah, it's really a curious time for a prime minister to inject himself during such a complicated political landscape in the United States, right? You've just had the Republican convention. You're about to have the Democratic convention. You've had President Joe Biden decide that he's not going to run for re-election. Kamala Harris now emerging as the presumptive nominee. And then you also have former President Donald Trump's assassination, and now you have the Prime Minister sitting, before a joint sitting of Congress. The timing is very, very curious here. But it will be his first time to address the joint sitting since the October 7th attacks. And you're right, Kamala Harris is on the campaign trail. She'll be in Indiana while the Prime Minister speaks in D.C. She would have presided over the hearing, the Senate gathering as the president of the Senate in her capacity as vice president, but she will not be there. The Israelis view that as a snub. And then, of course, cue President Joe Biden, who will, for the first time since announcing his decision not to seek re-election, will address the nation in a prime-time address from the Oval Office tonight. And one imagines the president will talk about his accomplishments, his legislative accomplishments, which is a long list, and really put the wind into the sails for Kamala Harris here. We've seen poll shifting in her favor. We've seen a great excitement in terms of the rallies and the turnout that we're seeing. So very much, a forward-leaning Joe Biden expected to speak tonight.
Sherwin, before I let you go, of course, we just also, seeing developments around the United States Treasury Department sanctioning 3 individuals involved in ISIS activities, and 2 of them are in South Africa. What else do we know?
That's right. Well, it's unclear where they are right now. They talk about the 2 individuals that are linked to South Africa. They sanctioned 3 today, yesterday actually, the Treasury Department, Bongiwe. 1 we understand in the DRC, 2 in South Africa, but they might not be there now. I also saw a report out of Uganda that one of the sanctioned individuals linked to South Africa was arrested in Kampala in Uganda earlier this month, and is being held on terrorism charges linked to his involvement in the Allied Democratic Forces in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So we don't really have clarity on where these sanctioned individuals are, but the United States certainly taking a consistent and firm view, really seeking to sanction individuals that they see as complicit in financing the operations of ISIS, be that in the sub-Saharan African region, and really trying to clamp down on some of the money networks that they believe are sometimes emanating from South Africa through ransom operations, kidnapping, robberies. That's certainly what the Treasury Department has been pointing to. But it will also be interesting to hear South Africa's state security reaction to what the United States is claiming in that sanctioning brief.
Interesting developments there, Sherwin. Thank you so much for that update. That's our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease.